Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Understanding Our Founders' Constitution. I'm your host, Frank Kuchar. Now, tonight I want to take a look at something that is very critical to our freedom and our liberties, guaranteed to us in the Fourth Amendment to our Constitution. You're familiar with the Fourth Amendment, the one that guarantees us our basic right to privacy from unreasonable searches and seizures, and how that is being more and more violated by the government without you even knowing about it. The most recent report that perhaps you have heard about that came out this past week was about the spying efforts by the government on our cell phone transmissions. If you haven't heard of this latest news item, then let me briefly explain what's going on. The government, it is revealed, has several private aircraft that are especially equipped to fly around the country and to mimic a cell phone tower, and thereby gather all the information that is connected with and within your cell phone when you're using it. In a nutshell, here's how cell phones work. As you're going about driving or walking or wherever you might be, and you want to use your cell phone, you turn your cell phone on, you dial a number or whatever it might be, or you try to connect to the internet if you have a smartphone. And what the phone does is seek the strongest signal of the nearest tower to it. And that is then how it connects to the internet or the cell phone network. But imagine what happens when the government has an apparatus that basically is impersonating a cell phone tower. Your cell phone is looking for the strongest signal. And so as this plane flies over, it then is emitting a signal which your cell phone thinks, well, that's the strongest signal, the nearest tower to me, and it connects through it. And in doing so, the government's apparatus is able to, basically like a sponge, absorb all the information that is on your cell phone. In a nutshell, that's how it works. And according to the report, they are basically able to blanket and cover the entire population of the country in gathering this information. It's been bad enough that we have had a gradual erosion of this over the last couple of decades, but is getting more and more heinous and more secretive, where we're not even aware that we're being snooped on. Does that sound like a free government? Does that sound like a republic based upon liberty and individual rights and privacy? Or does that sound more like a totalitarian form of government, a fascist type government, where the government snoops upon everybody, knows everything about us, and then can use that information against us? That is where we're headed. And so we're going to take a look here for a few minutes at the Fourth Amendment and how our founders intended it and why they intended it to secure our right from such types of invasiveness on the part of the government. There's another thing that you may not be aware of that's been in the news of the last few years. Have you ever heard of a FISA Court? FISA? Perhaps you have, but if you have not, let me briefly explain what that is. These courts were created back in 1978 with the passage of the Foreign Intelligence Security Act. Now, the act was intended to try and rein in unconstitutional surveillances of citizens by the executive branch of the federal government. And that's a good thing. We want them reined in. We don't want them just willy-nilly snooping on us. But what these courts are, they are now comprised of 11 federal judges that are selected and appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court without the advice and consent of Congress. Now, right there we have a problem. But we'll address that in just a moment. What these courts do, that if the government feels that there is a security threat, They go to this secret court, which is one of these judges, or some of these judges, that meets behind closed doors, and they say, we consider this person or this group or that group to be a security threat, and therefore we want to have the authority to intercept their phone calls, to hack into their computers, to whatever you want to think of. And this court grants them the authority to do so. The whole purpose was that, according to the Fourth Amendment, that they cannot search or seize anything without a warrant. And so this FISA court will issue a warrant for that purpose. But here's the catch. It's done in secret. There is no give and take over whether or not this truly is something that is warranted. And people don't know it. And since its inception through the year 2012, out of 34,000 requests by the executive branch of the Department of Justice for a FISA warrant, only 11 have been denied. Let me give you those numbers again. 34,000 requests in a 32 year span of time. Only 11 have been denied. Now, doesn't that seem a little bit far-fetched to you? But take a look at the other part. It says that the judges are appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And yet, how are judges to courts to be appointed? Well, we know that according to our Constitution, that it is the President who is to appoint judges. In Article 2, Section 2, it says the President shall have the power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. And it starts listing all the things he can do. And he shall nominate, and with the advice and consent of the Senate, appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and counsels, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. And so it is that the President nominates somebody to the federal bench, and the Senate confirms them. Nowhere does our Constitution say that judges can be appointed to a tribunal by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court without the consent and advice of the Senate. This is totally unconstitutional. And it amazes me that this has not been challenged and struck down. But what am I? I'm just a citizen who likes to read the Constitution and the words of our founders. I'm not a Harvard legal scholar who's gotten his degree in law. Nah, I'm just a regular citizen, reads the Constitution, takes it for what it says. Does this not then sound like to you we have a problem? Both with these type of courts and with more and more invasiveness of our government, that who knows what's being recorded about us, what data is being scooped up. We already know that they've been gathering all sorts of data from our service providers for our internet and for our cell phones. We already know that Obama is pushing for regulation of the internet, the freest form of communication that we've ever seen. What's going to happen there? So you see, when we start talking about all these things because of technology and so forth, we are in dire straits as to the threat of our civil liberties and freedoms. Now let's take a look at what the Fourth Amendment says and why our founders wanted it added. The amendment reads, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. There's two parts to this. Well, really, perhaps a little bit more. But to begin with, it says it is a right of the people, something that the government cannot take away. It's not something that the government is giving to us. This is one of our inalienable rights that Jefferson talked about in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence doesn't name all of our unalienable rights. He simply says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Among these are, meaning there's others that I'm not going to specify. And one of them we find here is in the Fourth Amendment, that we are to be secure in our, in other words, this idea of be secure means we have our expectation of privacy. Our persons, houses, papers, and effects, and so forth. And what are we to be secure against? And here's the first part. Unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Period. There must be a justifiable reason for us to be searched and something about us, whether it be ourselves or our property, be seized. That lays down the moral principle of our right to privacy. And it then goes on and gives the second part that is an extension of that moral obligation on the part of the government, that they obtain a warrant from a neutral magistrate in which they demonstrate probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and get this, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now we're told that these cell phone gathering planes, that they get a warrant for their actions, but they are scooping up massive amounts of data. But what does this amendment say? It says that the warrant that is issued has to be upon the demonstration by the government of there being a probable cause for that search or seizure, and that it must particularly describe the place to be searched, the persons or things to be seized, particular persons, particular things, particular places. When you have planes flying over and they're just scooping up like a dragnet huge amounts of data of thousands and thousands and thousands of us citizens, that is not a particular warrant. I don't care if they do have a warrant. It's not particularly describing the person or the things to be seized, because it is broad and general in nature. And they're saying that hopefully in all this data we will sift through and find this particular person or thing for which we are seeking. That is not compliant with the Fourth Amendment by any stretch of the imagination. And yet this is happening without our knowledge. And this stuff just kind of stumbles out in the open. Oh, guess what we learned? We've got the government doing this. We've got the government doing that. We have these massive computer sites where they are storing massive amounts of data, everything on us. Where is that warranted in the Constitution? The answer is, it is not. And ladies and gentlemen, in their doing that, we are losing our freedom. Again, I go back to something I've said numerous times. John Locke's second treatise on government, he says that the foundation of personal liberty and freedom is individual property rights. Individual property rights. What does that include? I think that's defined here for us in this Fourth Amendment. The persons, houses, papers, and effects. In other words, everything and anything that touches us individually, we have the right to be secure in. Because without that, we have no freedom and there are no liberties. And we are losing them daily by the actions of this government, all for the pretense of securing our safety. As Ben Franklin said, those who would give up freedom for a little bit of security deserve neither freedom nor security. And so with those words of wise Ben, I leave you for the evening and wish you a pleasant week. Good night.